I'd like to introduce Margaret Bruce. Well, first I'll do the last thing first. Margaret was present at the hatching of sustainable Silicon Valley quite a while ago, present at birth, but she is now the executive director of the San Francisquito Creek Joint Powers Authority. And if this were live, I would have encouraged everyone in a sing-along with the pronunciation of Francisquito.
Rhymes with mosquito, San Francisquito.
Rhymes with mosquito. Oh, that's a real good thing to have in mind. But Margaret's career has included a wide range of environmental program and policy leadership roles, private, public, nonprofit, and including mentioning sustainable Silicon Valley. Margaret's experience includes services in local elected and appointed roles in energy, water, and climate change. She's a woman of our time. So when she's not busy doing her part to improve circumstances for the planet and its inhabitants, that is you, dear readers or video people, Margaret makes art, writes stories, and tries not to share too much of her garden with the gophers and deer while she lives in the Santa Cruz Mountains. Do you have tomatoes? Is it a good year?
It is a great year for tomato plants. I haven't had so very many red ripe tomatoes.
More is
it's been a good year for peppers, ironically.
Strange, bad year for us for peppers, but a great year for tomatoes. But anyway, let's get to it. I will sneak away, and Margaret will grab screen and tell us about the San Francisquito, rhymes with mosquito, Creek Authority.
Yes. All right. So, and our connections to climate change and the issues that happen when water comes down and water comes up. So let me get you back in the Wayback Machine and take you back to New Year's Eve, thereabouts, of last year. As you may recall, we had a series of atmospheric rivers that came through our area and dumped truly an unprecedented amount of rain on the San Francisco Bay Area and in particular the peninsula. That atmospheric river parked over our particular San Francisquito watershed and brought us some interesting effects. So some of you may know, or maybe even were impacted by the flooding that occurred along the San Francisquito Creek on New Year's Eve as a result of this unprecedented amount of rainfall. And just as an aside, at some point, we're going to have to stop using the term unprecedented because it's becoming common. So first, a little context. Who in the heck is the San Francisquito Creek Joint Powers Authority? And we are made up of 5 government entities. San Mateo County Flood and Sea Level Rise Resiliency District, otherwise known as One Shoreline. The Santa Clara Valley Water District, otherwise known as Valley Water. And the cities of East Palo Alto, Menlo Park, and Palo Alto. And the reason we exist is to reduce flood risks. Back in 1998, there was the flood of record, which was rather devastating. The highest flow on record, recall it was an El Nino year, and we saw flooding from overbanking the creek in many places, resulting in flooding of neighborhoods, businesses. Highway 101 was closed. The Palo Alto airport was closed. East Palo Alto was very significantly affected. So as a result of that event, the Joint Powers Authority was convened to try and address the risks associated with flooding along this creek that happens to separate 2 counties and 3 cities. So something needed to be the glue that brought all of the people to the table who needed to be there to make decisions, to provide input, and to move projects along. And what we do is we plan and design flood risk reduction projects. We find the money for those things, and we build those things. So to put you in some geographic context, Highway 101 runs through the middle of your screen here. East Palo Alto is to the north of Highway 101 and a little bit on the south side of 101 in this picture. Menlo Park to the left, Palo Alto to the right. The San Francisco Bay is on the northern part of your screen, the upper part, and there are two ovals indicating two general areas where we are doing work along the creek. Now we have other projects as well, but I'm focusing on the creek part. Flood control projects or flood risk reduction projects typically work from the bottom up, like pulling up a zipper. So we had to do the necessary channel widening and capacity increases in Reach 1. That's the downstream reach there at the San Francisco Bay. That project was completed in 2019 and increased the channel capacity from something less than 5,000 cubic feet per second to well over 9,500 cubic feet per second. It also expanded marsh areas, reconnected the creek to a marsh area on the upper left. So there is now an ecological connection restored between the creek and the marshes. And it's like opening up a bottle. Instead of the creek functioning like a wine bottle and slowly meeting water out to the bay in a storm, it's like a great big mason jar, and it's easy to dump it out into the bay, preventing backwaters from happening further upstream. We're now turning our attention to various creek projects in Reach 2, the upstream side of Highway 101. So this is a picture of the expanded Reach 1 area. If you ever take a walk or a bike ride along the Bay Trail, you can easily see this. If you go south from the Cooley Landing facility in East Palo Alto, or north from the Lucy Stern Interpretive Center and follow the Bay Trail, you will cross this bridge and another one that it adjoins called the Friendship Bridge. This section of bridge, this flat bridge that you see in this image, is what was added, the channel capacity that was added as part of the Reach 1 project. It was a fairly complex project. It involved moving PG&E towers. It involved rerouting a PG&E, a large high-pressure PG&E gas line. It involved the installation of sheet pile, flood walls, and extensive levee works. We also had to remove and repurpose about 7.5 acres of the Palo Alto golf course to make room for this expansion. So, moving to that part of the creek upstream from Highway 101. I've highlighted in light blue so it's easy to see, but the creek runs through East Palo Alto, Menlo Park, and Palo Alto. Last winter, on New Year's Eve, the creek overtopped its banks in several places. And it kind of surprised us. We knew it was going to be a high flow, but the creek overtopped its banks in locations and at a flow level that we had not anticipated. You might be thinking, now, why in the world did this flooding extend so far away from the creek? Why is it going all the way up along Highway 101 in East Palo Alto and through Menlo Park over there on Oak? And why is it all over this part of Palo Alto? It's because the creek channel itself lives in its own alluvial fan. It is at the high point of the alluvial fan. And even though the channel is fairly deeply incised into the soft soils of the alluvial fan, its high point means that when it floods, the water wants to flow out, away, and down from the creek. It doesn't just fill up in a valley, it flows out and across the landscape. So people who live a mile, 2 miles from the creek are very definitely in the floodplain. In fact, I would say we are in the unfortunate position of having to tell people who have lived here for many, many years and who may not have realized that they are in the floodplain, that they live on an alluvial fan. That is in itself physical evidence that there has been flooding sometime in the geologic past. So we are doing our best to work within the confines of this very urbanized area with very little room to wiggle to bring greater protection to the residents of these three cities. The next steps for this particular Reach 2 project include replacing the Newell Street Bridge, or the Newell Road Bridge. The Newell Road Bridge is the one in the upper right in the picture there that has its feet inside the creek channel. It isn't super skinny, but it's skinny enough that it does create a backwater behind it. We want to make sure that all the bridges that span the creek leave enough room to convey the flow that we anticipate through those areas without transferring risk downstream. The next part of the work will be to widen sections of the channel and replace some of the top of bank structures. You can see in the bottom left picture, the Palo Alto side of the creek channel has these saccrete structures on a fairly sloping creek bank. In some places, that's just really, really skinny, either because it's been built that way by some person in the past, or just because the creek has ended up being sort of naturally skinny there. We will widen up those places and make more capacity and prevent backwaters from occurring in the upstream areas of those skinny places. The top of bank structures were put in the 1940s, maybe in the 1950s. They are not FEMA certifiable flood risk reduction structures. Some places they're still in good shape, but not certifiable. And other places they're not in good shape. So it's time for us to remove them, replace them, restore them, make them more robust, make them FEMA certifiable. There are two different kinds of structures on the top of bank. The Palo Alto side has these saccrete bags. The East Palo Alto side has this enormous concrete gravity wall that just is this large structure that follows Woodland Avenue, and that needs to be made more robust. Finally, the last piece is planned for the summer of 2026, and that's the replacement of the Pope Chaucer Bridge, which has a very narrow, very confined opening underneath it. Each of these three things happens in sequence, again, sort of pulling a zipper up from the bottom so that we work to the best of our ability in sequence. So we open up capacity and we then do the next thing. We open up that capacity and then we do the next thing. So the objectives are to contain the flow of the historic flood of record, the big flood that happened in '98. And a very important concept is, whatever it is we do, we cannot transfer risk to someplace else in the creek channel, some other community or some other creek feature. So just because you put sandbags on the top of a bank or build some more capacity in one place doesn't necessarily solve all the problems. It could be that if you armor a bank or add more safety features someplace, the water just ricochets through the creek channel and creates problems someplace else. So whatever we design, we have to do very thoughtfully and very carefully. And it's practically impossible, nor would the community accept, just concrete lining this lovely riparian channel through this urban area. There are beautiful trees. The creek supports a steelhead migration. It's an unusual example of a fairly natural creek in a very urban environment. So regulatory agencies do not want us to just make a trapezoidal channel with flood walls. They want us to do our very best to protect its natural features and support the endangered steelhead that use this as a migratory corridor. So we are very, very much in support of that. And it is also one of the things that confines and restricts our design options. So what happened on New Year's Eve? I would say climate change is moving the goalposts. We had a project based on the hydraulic model and the observed creek behavior looking in the past. As I said, the actual flood breakout locations were different. The creek behaved differently than we thought it would. And now that we have seen this different behavior, we need to take a pause and make sure that our project designs are actually reflective of the risks and hydraulic behavior of the creek as it is now and is projected to be. If we are, for example, spending tens of millions of dollars designing channel widening, top of bank and bridge replacements, only to come to realize that, oh my goodness, they were 20, 30, 40% less capacity, less protective than we thought they would be, it would not be a conscientious use of public funds. So we are validating our model and our project designs by evaluating the hydraulic behavior of the creek that we observed last winter. So that's all the water that's coming down. Now we're going to talk about the water that's coming up. So sea level rise is a thing, and it's a thing that is impacting East Palo Alto and Menlo Park, the two cities where we are engaged in a sea level rise and tidal flooding protective project called Safer Bay. This map is a FEMA map that shows what 3 feet of sea level rise or tidal flooding would look like in Menlo Park and East Palo Alto. It's pretty dramatic, but it's also good to remember that FEMA maps do not take into account existing uncertified FEMA levees. So there are levees along the Bay. The Bay Trail, as some of you may know, follows the tops of those levees, and they do provide some protection. So we can still endure quite a bit of sea level rise before something like this is a picture of our reality. So wherever the levees are, it is still true that as sea level comes up, so does shallow groundwater. So we are seeing emergent groundwater issues in East Palo Alto and Menlo Park, as well as the increased incidence of tidal flooding and sea level rise is certainly happening. So we've got this little project going on. The city of East Palo Alto is leading of course, their part. Menlo Park is leading in theirs. And the San Francisquito Creek Joint Powers Authority is being the technical lead and the CEQA lead for all of the environmental planning work for the strategy to advance flood protection, ecosystems, and recreation along San Francisco Bay, or Safer Bay. We have begun CEQA. This map shows our different reach alignments in very rough schematic. We have been embarked on CEQA for about 6 months now. We have a long way to go. So if anyone is familiar with these communities or with these parts of the San Francisco Bay shoreline, you should know this is all very preliminary. This is where, roughly, but not necessarily what, will be put in place. There's an awful lot to be figured out with the Ravenswood open space area, that red dashed line, because there are brownfields there with residual contamination and redevelopment happening there, and we have to work closely with the property owners. North of that, in Pond SF2, that is area that is near and dear to the heart of the Edwards Wildlife Refuge. And there are endangered species mitigations that we need to balance. So the Edwards Wildlife Refuge basically gets to call the shots on where our levee alignment should go. They know they need to protect western snowy plover as well as the Ridgeways rail, and we and they will work out the best location for the levee to protect both of those species. And moving on, our project schedule is by the end of this year, we will be completing all of the evaluations to support the EIR. Those are things like species surveys and wetland delineation and all manner of technical evaluations that support an EIR. We'll have 10% conceptual designs for all reaches. And a proposed mitigation approach. The overarching goal of the draft EIR that will be complete, we hope, next November, by the end of next year, is a programmatic level EIR for the entire 7.5 miles and project level EIR for the area of East Palo Alto, south of Bay Road. We have a very preliminary concept of what a protective levee might be, knowing that we need to avoid going into high value marsh. And we also have private property interests and lots of infrastructure on the inward side, on the landward side. So as small a footprint as we can design is what we have in mind. And if you want information about either of our projects, they can be found on the San Francisquito Creek Joint Powers Authority website. You can see those here, or you can call me. I appreciate your time, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Well, here we go. Thank you, Margaret. It was very interesting. I mean, it's, as you mentioned, a very kind of complicated area between 2 counties, 3 cities, and you know, quite a, well, and I was thinking, you know, we will be talking about groundwater rise actually in November at Build-A-Palooza. I mean, you know, it's a relatively new concept almost, and we have some experts that will be talking about that and its impact in the built environment, especially. Well, obviously, Miami is pretty famous for it, but Emeryville and San Mateo County has their moments as well. Let's see, I see there's a question from Matt Abbott. And actually good, he got to use the phrase alluvial fan situation, which caught my ear. How common is the alluvial fan situation you describe where the water flows downhill when the creek floods?
Quite common.
With other small waterways in the region?
Quite common. Many of the streams in the San Francisco Bay Area that drain the Santa Cruz Mountains or the Diablo Range to the east have this kind of erosive source material. And so when those creeks hit the valley floor, they tend to dump their materials, their suspended materials, and over eons build up such an alluvial fan. If you were to see something in a LiDAR map from above, you would see the same thing on the other side of the valley at the, what is it, Penitencia Creek has a very prominent alluvial fan. So yes, it's fairly common.
And actually, here's a question. We the next presentation, Colin Martirana from One Shoreline is going to be speaking on the larger map of San Mateo County. Do you have any tricky questions for him?
I don't. I adore Colin. We are collaborative colleagues, as his organization is a member of my organization. Sort of we're all in the family. Our projects connect with each other on the northern shore or the northern border of Menlo Park. So I don't want to take away from Colin's thunder, but One Shoreline has been instrumental in leading the cause for a voluntary uniform standard for shoreline protection. So I hope he'll have a chance to share that with you.
Yeah, they also
I don't
share
have any
some
provocative questions for Colin.
Okay,
just a shout out. Go Colin.
And actually, the 2 organizations share there's if we tested for fingerprints, we would find Dave Pine, his fingerprints on both of these organizations. Yes. In terms of he's the kind of joint powers authority guy.
Yeah, that's right.
And I mean, besides Peninsula Clean Energy but you know, he's been involved in this, and actually your predecessor, Len Matterman, is now the One Shoreline. He, by the way, he got Colin to do it today because he's in Washington, D.C., probably
stomping the marble
people for money.
halls. Yeah. Passing the tin cup around.
Right.
I wish him all success.
Yes. Stop thinking about impeaching people and give us money for flooding. So, well, I'm just looking to see across other
I was going to add,
questions.
if anyone is interested and would like
I
a
do have
tour, would like to join a tour of the Safer Bay project, the San Francisco Bay Restoration Authority, SFBRA, and you can find information about the tour on their website, is hosting a tour for the SFBRA board members. Dave Pine's fingerprints are on that too, by the way. So SFBRA is coordinating the tour. It is going to feature, among other projects, the Safer Bay project. So October 6th, it should be a beautiful day, a great day for a tour, a great day for a walk along the bay. So if anyone is interested, please check out the SFBRA and their upcoming October 6th tour and RSVP.
Great. If you think of it, if you can relay any information, I'll be sure to put it out on the SSV microphones.
Awesome.
The social media. So one other question, which is on so many minds, I've heard it just even on the radio this morning, with changing climate issues and specifically flooding. Apparently, I need to look into this more, but apparently there was a massive flood in Libya.
Yes. 2 dams failed as the result of Storm Dennis. No offense. Your
Geez.
namesake storm raged through the Mediterranean and dumped an unprecedented amount of precipitation on, I think it was northeastern Libya. 2 dams burst, one upstream failed first, cascading down through a watershed, bringing debris and a surge of water that ruptured the downstream dam and took out a quarter of a town. I've read this morning that they have, I think, accounted for 6,000 dead, and there are still thousands missing. And again, it's because with a warmer climate, with a warmer atmosphere, it holds more moisture. Higher sea surface temperatures evaporate more water into a warmer atmosphere that can hold more water. And when it hit the Atlas Mountains or whatever other mountain range that it happened to hit there in Libya, it's like a wet sponge hitting a wall.
So, yeah, I hate to end it on that note, but I'm afraid we're going to have to. And Margaret, we might want to bring you back to talk about insurance at some point. We are kind of thinking about a whole kind of insurance issue panel in future, but it's at very early stages. And I know you had, I think you had FEMA representatives at one point to do a kind of a meeting specifically about the many times flooded banks of the San Francisquito Creek.
It was, in specific, it was about FEMA's new risk rating 2.0 and how that new actuarially based rating system maybe provides a more accurate assessment of insurance risk and apportions insurance policy costs more equitably. There are many, many people in the East Palo Alto and Menlo Park area who, while vulnerable to flooding, have not incurred significant losses. And so their insurance premiums actually went down significantly. Whereas in other parts of the country, there have been chronic or repeated flooding events, Florida, for example, where their FEMA-based insurance rates have actually gone up significantly. Yeah. So that's what that was about.
Yeah. So, I mean, but just insurance, across like wildfires and as well, so, I mean, there's just so many things now about the insurance industry and risk management in a changing climate world. So Margaret Bruce, thanks for coming on, and we'll get to Colin now.
Okay.
To take an expanded view of the county. I think he's talking about more on the north stuff, San Mateo County stuff, but we'll see.
All right. Thank you so much for having me. I will stop my share and drop off. Thank you.